This video, I want to review some of the major characteristics of systematic reviews and meta-analysis for you. This video lecture goes hand in hand with some of the reading material that you'll have to look at and review as well in this module. So let's talk about the relationship between systematic reviews and meta-analysis before I go into the characteristics. It's important to understand that, and there often is some confusion around it. So let me say first what a meta-analysis is. It is a specific method of quantitative analysis. Its purpose is to say something meaningful about multiple studies, right? So it takes multiple studies and looks at the results and the testing of whatever therapy, whatever intervention was tested. And so meta-analysis is a quantitative analysis that can help us say something meaningful about this conglomerated data. A systematic review often uses a meta-analysis as its statistical procedure. In order to do that, researchers have to make sure that the studies are similar to each other. If they're too different, it's not going to work for meta-analysis and you can't say anything too meaningful. So they have to be similarly designed, similar participants, and so on. Now, not all systematic reviews include a meta-analysis. But if there is a meta-analysis, it's almost always integrated into systematic review. So in other words, you'll rarely find just a meta-analysis published, because that would basically just be the methodology section without the study design and so on. So most writers are trying to make it easy for us these days. So most authors tend to write into their title if it's a systematic review and a meta-analysis. Sometimes you'll see an article that just says meta-analysis, and you can be pretty certain that it's a systematic review. It just emphasizes it's a meta-analysis included in there. Okay. So again, not all systematic reviews have meta-analyses, but when there's a meta-analysis, it's almost always a systematic review. So now let's focus on the characteristics of a systematic review. Systematic reviews of randomized control trials, or RCTs, very common abbreviation that you all are familiar with. They represent the highest level of evidence of the effectiveness of a therapy, whereas RCTs are usually considered the best test of the effectiveness of a therapy. So we're talking with systematic reviews about level of evidence. And foreshadowing your assignment for this week, that is a big part of the summary of the Cochrane review, is your evaluation of how the systematic reviewers, or the authors of the systematic review, evaluated that level of evidence. Most commonly, systematic reviews focus on a specific therapeutic intervention that is relevant to clinical practice. Right? So that's really kind of the focus. They do follow the classical IMRAD format, and we're going to take a look at what exactly that looks like. So there's an introduction, the methods section, results section, discussion section, with some changes and maybe some different names and titles here and there, but it's pretty much a similar structure. So let's talk about the design for systematic review. It starts off with developing a study question that's very specific and complex. And I'm going to give you an example that Professor Wieland has helped me with to understand some of the differences. So for example, is vitamin C good for colds? Is far too general and not complex enough. Whereas this question is a lot more specific and a lot more complex, and it's actually paraphrased a little bit from an actual Cochrane review. And here it is. Compared to placebo, does vitamin C reduce the incidence, the duration, or the severity of the common cold when used either as a continuous regular supplement every day or as a therapy at the onset of cold symptoms? So very different from, is vitamin C good for colds? Right? So it really goes into what is it good for, your duration, severity, how it is used, and so on. And that's a big part of a systematic review, is to develop that very specific and complex study question. Then selection criteria based on PICO, the abbreviation PICO, also plays an important part in designing a systematic review. And PICO stands for Population, Intervention, Comparison, Outcome. And if you think back of me giving you those two different, is vitamin C good for colds, or the lengthy one compared to placebo, does vitamin C reduce the incidence, the duration, the severity of the common cold when used either as this or as that? When cold symptoms are, starting to emerge. So that's that question already emphasizes or goes into some of these elements of PICO. Sometimes T for time and S for study design is also added to PICO, so it's not just those four, so it could be PICO, I guess, PICO TS. Just FYI, you might come across that in some of your future readings, systematic reviews. And then, of course, what's essential in systematic review is a very detailed systematic review protocol, how the studies are reviewed, how you select them, and again, based on these selection criteria. So it's a very complex and, I would say, laborious process. Very important, very laborious. But the good news is you don't have to do this alone. If you're here at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, you can actually work with our wonderful research librarians who can be extremely helpful in this process. So if you and your colleagues are working on systematic review or have already worked, you have probably used them. And if you haven't, I suggest work with a librarian assigned to your school. So here's a common structure for that systematic reviews tend to follow. And again, you'll recognize the INRAD structure here. So there's an introduction or background section that at times can be longer than a typical randomized control trial, because often it includes a more extensive literature review. The method section can include sections like systematic literature review, data extraction, data synthesis for, not meat. I'm going to keep this one in here because it's a funny typo. Meta-analysis, not a meat analysis. Anyways, so those are common headings, common sections, section headings. So what the method section in a systematic review does, it's a little different than a typical method section in an empirical article. It really outlines or it really gives the readers an idea of where the author searched for information, what search terms were used, what selection criteria were used in choosing the including studies, what information was extracted, and how information was summarized, right? So all that part goes into the method section, and that's part of the systematic protocol for systematic review. Results, of course, includes details on which studies were in and excluded, quality of evidence, outcome based on study variables, and so on. And in the discussion section, which at times can be divided into different thematic sections based on the study variable or study variables. It can include information on the quality of evidence, suggestions for further studies, implications for clinical practice, but most importantly, the part that you really will have to include in your summary is what is the overall conclusion by the authors of the systematic review about the quality of evidence. That really drives systematic reviews, and that makes systematic reviews meaningful contributors to deciding which therapies or which therapy approaches are better or worse than others. So let me show you an example from a published systematic review down here on whole body vibration. The reason why I select this one is because in one of the videos for this module on review articles, I'm using a review article on whole body vibration. So I'm going to go show you some of the differences between review articles and systematic reviews. And so I kept it with the same topic to make it a little easier for that comparison. So anyways, so here is a typical structure. It's an abstract for a systematic review that shows you the typical structure. So background, objectives, type, literature survey. This is all sort of part of the intro, right? Or what we traditionally would call an intro in an INRAD article. You have the methodology. Synthesis is sort of like the results, right? And then conclusions are part of our discussion. And then you have this thing called level of evidence. And I'll show you a slide in just a second to give you some context to that. But if you look at this, again, it looks very similar to your typical INRAD article. So having now gone through 3 weeks of INRAD materials, this should look very familiar to you. Again, because systematic reviews are really focused on a variety of studies, this will look different. But again, the basics are sort of the same. And so level of evidence here, it's another way that authors judge, or judge might be too harsh of a word, evaluate the level of evidence in a systematic review. And so here is a table that gives you an idea of level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6, level 7. So it's a common table that you'll find in a variety of handbooks, systematic reviews, and things of that nature. So I just wanted to give you an idea what that means in that when we looked at the previous one here on level of evidence. Just FYI, in the Cochrane reviews use a different different system. In this system, it's called the grade system, GRADE, and the other video, the video on Cochrane reviews, will focus on giving you a quick overview of that. But the idea behind it is the same. It's about evaluating the level of evidence in a systematic review. So, typical headings for method sections in systematic review could be something, as I mentioned this earlier, systematic literature review, study selection, quality of outcomes, methodological quality, data synthesis. And in the study selections, you'll see some of the variables that these authors have used to select studies for the systematic review. Again, it's the same review on the whole body vibration Parkinson's disease that we looked at earlier. So I'm using it as an example for this video. And here I want to share the conclusion paragraph with you. And right in the first sentence there, only if you see the evaluation of the effect, and the effect, of course, the effect of the therapy intervention that was investigated here, namely whole body vibration. So here it says there are only a few studies with appropriate methodological quality that show only small to moderate effects of harmonic randomized whole body vibration. Therefore, at present, comma here, there's not enough research evidence supporting that vibration therapies improve Parkinson's disease motor symptoms, balance, gait, and mobility. Again, some more information, and then some recommendations and so on. Not so much recommendations here, but some more explanation of how the authors arrived at their conclusions. But here, this is the key part, right, where the authors evaluate the level of evidence, the quality of evidence of a systematic review in terms of whole body vibrations effect on Parkinson's disease. One last thing I want to show you. If you don't see meta-analysis in the title of a systematic review, you can quickly discern if there's a meta-analysis being used, because most likely authors will include what is called a forest plot. You see two forest plots here. The lower one here that's circled is the one that's a forest plot of a meta-analysis. So I'm not going into detail how to read a forest plot, because it's personally not my forte. But I did include a video in the course, in the supplemental course materials, that just a 5 or 6 minute video that really explains very well, much better than I could put it together, how to read a forest plot and what it means. So if you're interested in that, take a look at that. I really thought it very useful, and it helped me understand it. I'm not going into detail in this, not just because it's not my strength. I'm not trained as a statistician, but the purpose of our course really isn't about statistical methods. It's really about the genres of writing. So I want you to think about systematic reviews for this particular course as a genre, not just as a methodological approach for research and review, but in general as a genre of writing as well, even though it is very, very technical.